For today's critical thought, we're turning to the topic of something that sounds a little bit weird. Do you need to play video games in order to build them? And why this is such a unusually polarizing point among designers, and what the real answer should be. As someone who follows a lot of game developers on social media, it means I'm also privy to the kind of game dev social media discourse, which is a year-round kind of seasonal cycle of the same debates, like an internal Groundhog Day from hell, including greatest hits like, do video games need difficulty sliders? Are video games art? Is GDC the best/worst place to go to learn about the game industry? And there is another one that I've been seeing time and time again. Do you need to play video games in order to be able to develop them or actually build something? And it's one of those things that for a lot of people watching, I think especially my longtime fans, the answer should be very apparent. But yet it keeps popping up. And it keeps popping up among two distinct groups of developers. The first one is the novice, the first year game dev, the student, the enthusiast taking their first step. And they want to build something very experimental, very artistic, something that has never been seen before. And this is where we get this argument that it stifles creativity. Why do I need to play platformers if I want to make a platformer? If I want to build a visual novel crafting, cooking, racing space sim, well, it's unique. How dare I study something else? And it's going to mess with my creative process. And I think I just gave someone a bit of chest pain with that sentence. But then there's the other group, and this is one that it's a little surprising, but I think in a way it does kind of make sense. These are the established veterans, the people who have either led major teams or have been a part of major teams that have put out some fantastic games. We're not talking about games that sold 1,000 copies, 10,000 copies. We are talking people who've been part of teams that have sold millions of copies. These are AAA studios, veterans of the industry in some capacity. And when you look into like social media discourse and stuff like that, a common advice a lot of industry vets will tell you is that you shouldn't be looking in the game industry for inspiration. And I think this is kind of where this discussion somewhat stems from. That you should be looking into other things, architecture, animation, acting, film, whatever, as a source of inspiration for your next game. But I think there's another part of this. And it's this idea that once you've been a part of a major studio, you've been part of a major team, whatever, you've kind of made it. That, okay, my game sold 10 million copies. I'm done learning. I don't need to look at anything else. I don't want to say it's kind of beneath them, but it's that idea that kind of at some point you've learned everything that you need to know. And it's why this discussion keeps popping up. That at some point, you're going to be, that, as they say, you're too busy to play video games, or there's no value in it. Why not watch a video? Oh, don't worry, we'll be coming back to that point in a few minutes. And when I think about these different points from both the novice and the expert point of views, I really don't agree with them. And there are several reasons why. Before we get to them, though, let's get the major point out of the way. What makes a video game unique from any other entertainment medium out there is that it is an interactive one. When we say to study film, study a TV show, study writing, art, anything like that, it is a very much a one-sided experience. If I want to study film, okay, watch a movie. Watch 4 movies. Take 5, 10, 20 hours. You can study film very easily along those lines because it's all being given to you. The same for art. And at least studying like the different styles. Again, if you want to actually make art, that is, of course, a far different story. But interactive mediums are very different. Just watching something doesn't give you the whole story. And when I was coming up with this topic in the back of my mind, I was thinking about, is there value in studying a video game simply through video, simply by watching someone play it? And while you could get some elements out of it, it's not really going to give you the full picture. And there are several reasons why. The first one is something that's very obvious. Every person plays a video game differently. How a novice, or even a core gamer, plays a game is fundamentally going to be different than watching a speedrunner. If you are watching a AGDQ event, or any professional speedrunner play a game at the Grandmaster level, and take notes on that, you're basically watching gameplay that 0.000000001% of your audience is going to do. And if you design a game entirely around that segment, you're just designing masochism. And maybe there is some interest from people for that, but it's not going to be a mass market or a consumer-friendly product. Another aspect is that watching someone play, you're not getting the experience of the UI and the UX. And as I've said in a lot of design videos and a lot of our design talks here, one of the easiest ways to screw up a game is mess up the UI. And how you do that is by not paying attention to how a game feels in someone's hands. And this is something that if you watch any footage of a game, you will never know this. You will never understand the difference in terms of different jumping tech in a game. How there's different combat in a game like Devil May Cry versus Neo versus From Software's games versus Soul and Sanctuary versus any action or action-oriented game released in the past 30 years. And this is, again, as a somewhat of a tangent, why I'm such a huge proponent of game preservation. That I want to be able to have access to all these video games. Because if you want to be able to study the inner workings of a game, you need to be able to play it. And footage along these lines just doesn't cut the mustard. Now, another point, this is kind of the joking point, but there may be some truth here. If you do not want to play a specific genre, if you hate a specific genre, you probably shouldn't be designing a game around that genre. And I know a few of you are going to be giving me a weird look as I said that sentence, because why are you bringing something like that up? But I've seen some developers will have these discussions about how much they don't like a genre, how much they want to kind of reinvent the genre, or do something that is for someone who hates that genre. And while there is certainly merit in designing a shooter for non-shooter fans, a platformer for non-platforming fans, it's not a good place to build a gameplay around. Because here's the question. If you're building me a platformer where the entire act of jumping and platforming and all those mechanics don't work, or they're not supposed to work, what's your core gameplay loop? That is not a joking question. Because for a lot of these games, and this is something that I see a lot of new developers and people who really try to push the experimental, unique side, a kind of trap they fall into, is that they'll build a game for a genre and make it completely antithetical or completely opposed to what that design is. But then there's oftentimes not really any other gameplay to it. If you're building a platformer slash JRPG and you hate platformers and you don't want to do anything about them, you're going up with a game that is maybe a okay RPG, but a terrible platformer. And why should I play an okay RPG and a terrible platformer in one, when I can just play an amazing JRPG over here, an amazing platformer over there. And the only way you're going to be able to improve and understand the finer points of the design of a genre is that you need to play it. You need to understand, why does someone enjoy this? And this is, again, something that if you just watch footage, even if you watch like a big name streamer, someone who has millions and millions of views on Twitch or YouTube, and they are joking and laughing it up and they're enjoying this game, they're still not really going to give you the words as to, why is this game good? There are very few people on YouTube who will sit there and describe the GUI and the UX of a game. And again, overwhelming positivity and overwhelming negativity do not give you good advice and good feedback. Just because everyone says they love a game or everyone says they hate a game doesn't explain why. And even if they do try and go into detail, they may just say stuff like, oh, well, this game is stupid because the developers are lazy. Or, this game is brilliant because it is a work of art. And again, one of the reasons why studying games is so important is that you should be able to answer the following questions with any game you are playing. Why are people playing this game? What is good about this game? What would stop someone from not playing this game? And this, again, is where UI UX really comes into play. Because, again, watching footage of 100 shooters, 10,000 platformers, 80 million RPGs, there's probably close to that by now in this industry, it's not explaining to you what are the pain points. And this is a very salient point about why you need to study video games directly. If you watch positive reviews on a game, or even negative reviews on a video game, they may say very basic things. This game, the jumping is horrible. This is janky. This is, this combat feels nice and sweet, or whatever else, whatever buzz terms kids are saying these days. But how do you translate into game design terms? How do you understand, what does jank mean if we're talking about a first-person shooter? What about platformer? What about survival sim, a crafter, a cooker, a conversationalist, any other C's we can think of? Unless you are actively playing that game, you are not understanding the pain points. And some of those pain points can be either in a game because someone was inexperienced at the genre, or they may never have even heard of these pain points because all they did was watch footage of the best games. And this is one of the reasons why we say, when you're studying video games, you want to play games across the spectrum. It's great to play Mario games if you want to study a platformer, or study Doom Eternal if you want to build a first-person shooter. But you also want to study games that maybe got 5 out of 10s, 2 out of 10s, 0.01 out of 10 from consumers. Because these are the games that are basically going to spell for you every single possible trap that you could step into when you're building your game. And this is why I've said this before, and as a kind of a promo for an upcoming series I'll talk about in a few minutes, that just watching footage of a popular game is not giving you the inner workings of it. Here's a really good example of this. Jumping. Pick any fantastic platformer. Super Mario World, Pizza Tower, Celeste, anything like that. And I want you to tell a game designer, I recreate this gameplay perfectly from scratch, but you're not allowed to play those games. And the developers who are novices will laugh at you, and the professional ones will probably start losing all their hair, and they may collapse in pain from that sentence. And the reason is that the inner elements of the GUI, the UI, and the UX can only be understood and studied when your hands are on that gamepad right here, or on the keyboard and mouse. Because these are the feel of the game. That very amorphous kind of concept when we talk about video games. The game feel, the gunplay, as we've said on some of our shows, the juice of a game. And this is not something that you can learn by just watching footage. But here's another point I want to kind of touch on as kind of a counter to what we've been saying. Why should you watch footage? What can you actually get out of that? One of the best ways you can get out of footage is if you're watching playtesting sessions. If you're watching how someone's eyes are darting around the screen as they're trying to find information. Watching someone who gets stuck at a point. Why, they get frustrated. This is very useful information. But you see, here's the very important point. This is very useful information while you're building the game. Watching someone get frustrated playing Spelunky. Well, okay, that's great for Spelunky. That's not going to help you when you're building your game because those eyes aren't on your title. And you have to be aware, again, of all these little and sometimes not so little things that can ruin a game for someone. And to kind of begin to wrap things up, as I've said, as we've talked about a lot in these videos and interviews and so on the past decade, there's a difference between a designer who gets a genre and someone who doesn't get that genre. And this is not something that is kind of like an educational aspect, as in, you must go to college and have a 4-year degree in order to be able to understand how Mario jumps, or why people love idle games, or why everyone loves Vampire Survivors. And I do feel there's a little bit of elitism in this point. And we've seen a lot of developers who have come from AAA backgrounds, again, 5, 10, maybe even 20 to 30 collective years of this team in the industry making an indie game for their first time and utterly failing at it. And that is not hyperbole. I have played a lot of games, more than you may think, from new indie studios made up of game industry veterans that feel horrible. They look horrible. It feels like this was done by like an amateur team rather than someone with, again, 15 to 20 plus collective years. And one of the reasons why this could have happened is that they maybe didn't study the genre. Yes, they may have worked on a game like that. They may have been one of the hundreds or dozens of people at their studio working on this game. But did they really understand why these decisions were made? Did they actually study genres while their game was being made? Because being told to make a first-person level like this, and this is noticeably different than saying to yourself, I'm going to build a first-person shooter level from scratch in the style of Quake meets Half-Life meets Portal. There you go. For every first-person shooter designer out there, why don't you make me a level that combines all those aspects and get in by Monday? And just because you have experience in the industry, again, experience is not as transferable when it comes to genre expertise. Being the #1 fighting game player in the world means very little if you're trying to learn Stellaris, or if you're trying to learn even something like a visual novel game. Again, there is a fun point. A lot of people, and we've seen this, look down on the visual novel genre. They look down every one of those games as being simple or stupid or anyone can make them. But again, there is a huge difference in terms of quality, in terms of writing, in terms of structure between really good visual novel games and really bad ones. Just as there is something with platformers and shooters. And again, this whole video is just me naming genres after genres. And as I said to this point, the games that come from the designers that work they study those specific genres. They have played the best examples, they played the worst examples, the weird examples, the ones you may have never even heard of, but they're out there. And they did that in order to understand the feel and understand what to do and what not to do. Because just because you see a game on Steam or itch or PSN, Xbox, whatever, and it may have like a 2 out of 10, or it may have a 10 out of 10, that doesn't mean that the 2 out of 10 game was a horrible title. It doesn't mean that 10 out of 10 game was perfect. Again, here's a fun way you can understand, or a fun way you know that you've studied too much game design. When you can point out and find issues in Game of the Year winning games. Because trust me, every Game of the Year winning game that has ever been made in this industry still has flaws in it. And the only way you're going to be able to understand them is by playing video games. So, with all that said, and we'll see how much trouble I get into with this video, being able to understand, study, and process game design gameplay is a very useful skill, and it's a very essential one, especially if you're trying to go on your own or build your first game. Because this is how you avoid a lot of those traps that we've said. As we have played and re-reviewed plenty of video games here, I'm sure you have seen a lot of games too. There are games from first-time developers that are phenomenal, that it feels like this is someone who has been working in this space for decades at this point, and it may literally be their first game. And the reason why is that they studied this genre. And again, studying game design is not the same as just playing video games. And it's not something you can just go to school, again, get like a 4-year degree and just say, well, I am now the master of all cooking sim games. Or I am now the messiah of racing sims. It doesn't work like that. And you need to spend a lot of time studying these games. You don't need to play, again, like every single platform or every single racing game. But you still need to play the good, the bad, the odd. And again, see where these games succeeded and see where they failed. So at that, it's time for a bonus shameless promo for this video, as I'm going to be working on a new series about how to learn game design, or how to learn specific genres, looking at, again, the good, the bad, and somewhat in between examples of it, and what you should glean from them when you are studying them. Let me know what you think about that in the comments down below. Of course, do all the other YouTubing stuff people tell you to do. If you're interested in many more of my thoughts on design, check out my game design books wherever they are sold. Visit our Discord and Patreon, and come back for daily discussions on game design here, and on game wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.